Our first speaker is Patrick Murray. He is the founding director of the Monmouth University Polling Institute. Under his leadership, the Monmouth University poll has become the poll of record for New Jersey with in-depth tracking of public policy and quality of life issues. In 2010, Politicker NJ.com named Patrick its Pollster of the Year and also listed him as the 43rd most powerful person in New Jersey. He frequently appears as a commentator on state and national and regional TV, radio, and he's always looked to for his astute election coverage on election night.
It's my pleasure to be here. Hyperlocal sites became very important to me, as it probably did to a lot of other New Jerseyans just in the past week or so, as I was trying to find out what was going on with the floods and the hurricane, and found a lot of standard websites, news websites lacking. My in-laws actually live down in Middletown, which is, is there anybody from Middletown patch here? Which almost every house, I think, lost power down in Middletown for nearly a week because of what happened down there. And the only way we could figure out what was going on, calling my in-laws back and forth, was to follow the Middletown patch to just see whatever updates they had about what was being said about what happened. And my own town, which is, I live in Franklin Township right over the border here, doesn't have a hyperlocal website. If anybody wants to start one up there, that would be great. I'd appreciate that. So I was following the New Brunswick site, which is from the alternative press, to figure out what was going on down here. I was asked to talk about a couple of things here today about election, how hyperlocal sites could cover elections. And the first thing was what are the big issues in this upcoming election season? And Heather did not define the term big for me. What are the big issues? And big matters in many different ways. There is no statewide big issue in the sense that this election is going to change much of what's going on in the state. The legislative elections are not going to be a referendum on Chris Christie in the sense that, say, the 1991 elections were a referendum on Jim Florio, meaning that while Chris Christie is certainly going to be a presence as governor in the legislative races, people are going to be talking about him, there is not going to be concerted effort on the part of either the Democrats or the Republicans to put Chris Christie as the reason to go out and vote for or against somebody. There were certainly individual reasons and things that the Christie administration has done that will come up, but each of these will be local. For example, in the 2nd District, which is in Atlantic County, Atlantic City issues are going to be predominant, and certainly the designation of the tourism district and what's going to go down there with redevelopment is going to be the predominant issue, as well as the fact that the mayor of Atlantic City appears to be keeping his name on the ballot as an independent candidate, which would siphon off votes from the Democratic incumbent. So that's the issue there. Another race where there is some competition is up in the 38th District in Bergen County. While there is competition, it's almost, I'll go back to Atlantic City and I'm going to put a bet down that the Democrats will win, will retain all 3 of those legislative seats. That's going to be mainly because they're going to paint the Republicans up there, as particularly the Senate candidate, as a Tea Party candidate, and too extreme for that district. 14th District is another one which is perennially competitive. It is still competitive even as it's been redrawn. That's always about public workers, big public workforce in that district. That becomes one of the big issues there. So obviously the governor and the governor's agenda is going to be important, but other than those 3 districts, there really isn't going to be much competition here in the state. So if you are a hyperlocal site in any other district, you may be the only ones who are covering these legislative races. So think about that as your charge. One of the things that will be important in covering that is, as I mentioned, the district lines have been redrawn, so some towns are now in different districts. So this will be, you have an opportunity here to introduce the voters in your town to legislators that they may not have heard of ever. Some of them may not have heard of them regardless of whether they've been in that district all along or not. But that, you know, that it's brand new to them that they are being represented by somebody else whose name they've never seen on the ballot before. This is one of the things that I should point out in what we see in polling is that name recognition is not a stable metric. If you say, can you name your legislator? It goes up and down, depending on whether that name is in the news or not. So at election time, more people know who their legislators are. And then a month after the election, they forget. It literally goes out of their mind. Because other things come into their mind that are more important for them to retain in their short-term memory. One of the things that you should probably be aware of is that the person after the governor, the elected official, that the greatest number of New Jerseyans can name off the top of their heads without any help is their mayor. Just under half of the poll we did a couple of years ago, just under half, 45%, could correctly name their mayor. Another 20% claimed they could name their mayor, and then when we said, okay, who is it? And they weren't quite on the mark. Back in, I think, 2003, we asked the same question of the governor. That was McGreevey at the time. 68% named McGreevey off the top of their head. The other 32% didn't know who the governor was. I would venture to guess, we haven't answered that question since then, I would venture to guess that the recognition number would be much, much higher now than it was back then with the current governor. But just that gives you a sense. And then when we ask questions, for example, we asked, can you name your 2 U.S. senators? Only 30% could name one of the 2 U.S. senators. All right, so that's how much better known a mayor is than a statewide office holder here in New Jersey. And then you go down to state legislators and members of Congress, and it's even lower. So anything that's really important this year, that's going to be a big issue, is going to be a local issue. So I've been talking about legislators, but obviously town council races and so forth. These are things that are important and don't get covered. And so the other question was asked to talk about was how important is it to have quality coverage of local races? Well, it's always important to have quality coverage of local races, so the real issue is what void can you fill here? And let me give you some numbers about how people get information, to give you a sense. Back in 1970, my numbers, 1973, when we asked people, how do you get, well, I was only 9 years old at the time, so I actually wasn't asking anybody this question. But people at Eagleton were asking this question, and they asked, how do you get most of your information about New Jersey politics and government and public affairs? 74% said they got it from newspaper, and 11% said they got it from TV. 3% said they got it from radio. Asked that question again in 1981, the number for newspapers drops down to 58%, the number for TV goes up to 22%, radio stays the same at 3%. In 1984, it's about the same, with TV going up a little bit more to 33%. 1998 continues to stay stable. 52% for newspapers, 35% for TV, 6% for radio. Radio starts to see a slight uptick, but TV in particular sees an uptick. So what happened is we had a big drop in the 70s in newspaper. That stayed about stable through the 1980s and 1990s, but with TV getting a larger share. And then we get into the 2000s and things start to shift again. In 2004, 38% got most of their news about New Jersey politics from newspapers, but 43% got it from TV. 6% got it from the radio, and then another 6% from the internet. Jump ahead another 5 years to 2009, it's 28% newspapers, 41% TV, 6% radio, and 19% internet. And jump ahead one more year to 2010, internet even bumps up another 2 points to 21%. almost closing in on newspapers at 28% as the primary source of information. However, TV is still the most used source of information about New Jersey at 40%. Now, what's the impact of that? Well, how good a job do these outlets do at covering New Jersey politics? Very few say that any of these outlets do an excellent job. The newspapers topped out at 14%. But if you add excellent and good together, we get 6 in 10 say newspapers and New Jersey television outlets, which would be News 12, and at the time we did the poll was NJ, did a good job at covering New Jersey, which meant 4 in 10 said didn't do that great of a job covering New Jersey. About just under half said New Jersey radio does a good job at covering New Jersey, and only 3 in 10 said that the Philly and New York media markets, newspapers, radio, and TV, did a good job at covering New Jersey. At the time, we did not ask about websites and how good a job they were doing. And the reason being was because the low number at the time that were using websites regularly. How often do you visit websites for state and local news? We found 28% said that they visited weekly. 44% visited websites weekly for national and international news. When we got to newspapers, 71% said that they looked at a newspaper, at least looked at a newspaper weekly. 62% looked at TV and local news weekly. But remember, more people said that they're getting their news about New Jersey from TV news, which is doing the worst job of covering New Jersey. So what that means is they're not learning a lot about New Jersey. And what's interesting is that when we ask people, particularly in a newspaper, when they open a newspaper, and putting aside sports and features, what are you looking for? What kind of news are you looking for? Local news tops the list. 42% said local was the first thing that they looked for, 30% said national news, and just 15% said statewide news. So if you look at the content of a newspaper, it's pretty much opposite of what people are asking for a newspaper to cover. And that's the void that hyperlocal news sites can fill. The things that newspapers used to cover, which are, school board meetings and budgets and, road projects and development and the things that affect people in their day-to-day lives. Those are the things that people are looking for from a local news source. And they say that newspapers are not doing the kind of job that they used to do in that. The issue that we have is that we're not to the point yet where websites have replaced the newspaper. And in some instances, and I remarked on this, particularly as I noticed during the flood, sometimes the newspaper websites, which are one of the sources that people go to online, don't do a good job at using the technology to give information. In fact, they look more like just a newspaper online rather than something where you're interactive or you can find a lot of information. That these are the things that people are going to start demanding more and more of. And when you think about your audience, think about the fact that a third of New Jerseyans under the age of 55 are now going online looking for local news, versus less than 1 in 5 of those over 55 and older. So it's a younger audience, but not a young audience. It's just not a senior citizen audience, basically. So probably the news about the senior center is not as valuable online as news about what's going on in local schools for parents who are looking for that kind of information. So, a couple of things that you can do that are not being done. For example, biographies of the candidates in your town, let alone legislative district, your council candidates and mayoral candidates. Biographies, people don't have those. Online virtual debates where you pose questions to the candidates and put their responses online. This will be the only source that most people have to get that kind of information. You can even do background checks on candidates. There is a national site, and I can't remember, Joe, you might remember this guy. This guy came into Trenton. What's the name of that site?
I know what you're talking about.
And we'll do free criminal background checks on any candidate. And the idea was to level the playing field because, you know, everybody has, if you have more money, you can do opposition research. So you can dig up stuff on the other candidate, but maybe the candidate whose campaign was digging it up also has stuff in their background too. And so this, I can't remember, they're up from Colorado or something like that, I can't remember. But they're willing to do this for free. Nationwide is a service that they offer, and I wish I remembered it. I thought about this as I was coming in this morning. But these are things that you can avail yourself of and put online, and you will be the only source that's providing this type of information. So that's my charge to you. These are the things that are lacking. These are the things that people are actually looking for. They want to find that. And more of them are turning from newspapers to online. You know, and the newspaper online websites may have provided the introduction to your websites because it got people used to going online looking for stuff. Now they're looking for the stuff and they're not finding it, so now they're looking online in other places to find it, but they're not exactly sure how to do that. And so a lot of it has to do not only with providing the content, but providing it in a format online which is easy for people to find, to do. You know, one of the things that I was just trying to find my town's budget the other day, could not find it online. I don't know whether it is online. Legally it's supposed to be online on the town's website, and I'm putting a call into my mayor to find out exactly where it is. But these are things that as a local website, you can go to the towns that you cover and make sure they are keeping up with all the things that they should be keeping up in terms of providing information to their constituents. All right, so that's about all I have to say. I don't know if anybody had any questions.